Melody, what happened was I'd started getting into the history of electronic music at that point, and so that was my sort of introduction into going back a couple decades or a few decades and just getting really immersed into the pioneers of the genre. And so I wanted to do something that sort of took me back to the beginnings and the early stages. And that's something that started with Melody, and it never changed after that. I got stuck in that, and I sort of never got out of that. I was just fascinated with sort of the early phases and stages of the genre, and that's kind of what catapulted that. And, yeah.
Do you remember, like, who was the first of the early electronic artists you stumbled across?
Yeah, well, it was a unique thing at the time, because what had happened was, there was that moment in the early 90s where all of the, 80s music was just horribly old-fashioned and out of date. And so I was really pushing against that myself. And so when you had all that really, really cool, like, British house stuff come up, it had sort of taken a turn. It had kind of returned to analog. It had gotten away from the DX7 era of 85 to 90, era of 80s digital music with the Fairlights and the Synclaviers. And so the great thing about the house movement was that it returned to analog. It had some of the elements of the early electronic sound, but it kind of, the push and the pull of it was, of course, more of a rhythmic thing with the really straightforward rhythms and the way they were mixed. So this was like a genre of music now that the drums got pushed way to the front, the bass got pushed way to the front, and then you'd have sort of these embellishments, all these analog embellishments around that. And so that kind of got me introduced me back into more of an earlier sound, because they were using the tools from the 70s and the early 80s to do something that was really more modern. So having kind of been introduced to the tools, it brought me to some of the earlier artists. I probably don't remember. I mean, I really got into Jarre and Kraftwerk, Tangerine Dream. So it's a lot of that German experimentalist stuff that I got into before I even got into getting into early Human League, which that kind of kicked off the doing the sort of the very pure analog-only style format of creating tracks. And so yeah, it was just, I think all of it just sort of happened organically after that, but it was really rooted out of all that early house stuff, which was really a return to all of the early sound in a sense, yeah.
Do you remember, like, any early on favorite albums?
I think the record that changed the game for me was Man Machine by Kraftwerk, and I was really fascinated by the simplicity of it. And then I think when I heard Travelogue and Reproduction by Human League, I think that kind of distilled all of the things that I felt like I liked about analog sound, and it just kind of focused me into thinking, well, this is the direction I need to go. And hey, look, you can do songs that don't have hi-hats, and they can be very oriented around a lot of arpeggiations, and so that, I think those records really got me into sort of wanting to get into the pureness of analog sound, and just developing I don't know why or how, but I just developed sort of a fascination for it that to this day has never gone away. Yeah, those would have been some of the early records.
The thing that I think about, or one of the things I think about with Man Machine or early Human League, it's this sort of like draining of emotion, and like the songs become very emotionless. Like they really avoid talking about that, and instead just kind of talk about technological concepts or stuff like that. So I think it's really interesting that you were being inspired by these bands, but then I think about Melody, and there's a lot of emotional content in there. Was that something that struck you, that there was that kind of juxtaposition between like what you were inspired by and yet the way in which you were very different from them at the the same time in that aspect.
Well, I think, I mean, at the risk of sounding arrogant, I guess, when I listen to those early Human League records, I think the songs are really horrible, and so to me it was being inspired by the sound, never inspired by the songs. Even with Kraftwerk, it's like, to me they were really good jingle writers. So you listen to We Are the Robots or something, and that's a really catchy little jingle they came up with, but it's not really a song, it's just a phrase that they sort of repeated over and over again. And but I was fascinated by that because it told you what a pop song could be potentially, or what it doesn't have to be potentially. And so, but to answer your question more directly, I think what I did was I took my love, I said, well, what if you could have a sound that's influenced by that, but could also be just really melodic and sort of beautiful and very intimate and very personal, and can be something that can be related to regardless of all of the underpinnings of the machine-like sounds. So to me, it was that juxtaposition between the two things. So make a really kind of weird sort of soundtrack, but let the song be just like all the classic pop songs. So just, write Stop in the Name of Love 18 times, but underneath it, put a bunch of sounds that don't necessarily go with those emotions. So I loved sort of the sharpness of the two things kind of colliding. So, you listen to the opening track, of Melody, and it's just, in a sense, it just, none of it really, makes a lot of sense, and I loved having those divergent elements going on, that always fascinated me. Didn't always work either. So.